Worst of the weather right now is essentially from College Parkway and southward along McGregor Boulevard through South Fort Myers. And if there is any part of this storm that's producing hail, one of the areas that's probably a hot spot right now will be just to the west of the Health Park area, where you see these shades of purple pop up. That's very, very high reflectivity, either super heavy rain or small hailstones. Consider where the center of the storm is. Draw a big plus sign over top of it. When you find yourself on the eastern side or the right-hand side, that's often referred to as the dirty side, because look at where all the weather is. Our community is surrounded by water, and everything you see around you basically falls in one of three categories. You have fresh water, which would be what you find in something like Lake Okeechobee. You have salt water, which is what you'd find, of course, in the Gulf of Mexico. And then you find something we refer to as brackish water, which is essentially a combination of fresh and salt water. You find it most often when you have like a freshwater river run into a saltwater body of water. Now, as long as these three categories of water stay separate, the environment is totally fine. But hurricanes have the ability to greatly change the composition of water when storm surge events are unleashed on land. You can picture it this way. If you think back to Hurricane Ian in areas that were hard hit by storm surge like Pine Island and Sanibel Island, a lot of freshwater ponds that weren't connected to the Gulf of Mexico before the hurricane were overrun with saltwater flooding, saltwater flooding will be represented here by this blue foil. Now, of course, eventually the saltwater retreated, but the thing is the salt that was inside that water stayed in the freshwater ponds. So now, post-hurricane, we can't consider them to be freshwater, but instead would refer to them as being brackish water. Now, there are some animals like alligators and bull sharks that can go back and forth between fresh and salt water without a problem. But a lot of the things like freshwater fish and frogs that would have formerly been inside your freshwater pond, since the hurricane, have probably all died out. So if this applies to you in your community, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, when is everything going to go back to normal, right? Unfortunately, it's going to take quite a bit of time. To visualize this for you, what I did here is I put a whole bunch of salt water inside this bowl. So think of this bowl essentially as being one of those ponds that's now turned brackish. During the dry season in South Florida, it's not at all uncommon for the water to almost entirely evaporate out of these ponds. But because salt is a solid, it is left behind in the environment. So how do we get rid of that salt? It is a very slow process. Even though it might take a hurricane only a few hours to cause a body of water to go from fresh to salt, it can take years and years and years of flooding. If you think of the water inside this watering can as being freshwater rain flooding, you have to literally physically flood the area year after year after year to physically remove the salt in order for the environment to go back in balance. Hang in there. All right, biggest story of the day, of course, is the rain. If you caught the newscast last night, we talked a lot about finding a quality rain gauge and then explaining
it in the right place,
where it goes in your yard, because that's very important. Tonight, I'd like to advance the story further now that there's rain in your rain gauge on how to properly read it. And a shout out to my high school chemistry teacher, Mrs. Kuchenbecker, for teaching me about this stuff. So this is what a rain gauge might look like. And this thing here, that little droplet of how the water looks, that's called a meniscus. Now, if you were to look at a rain gauge like this, you might be tempted to think that's the number you should record, when in reality it's what's down here. Because of the surface tension of water, sometimes it'll sort of crawl up the sides of your rain gauge, but the most accurate measurement that you can find from your rain gauge is at the bottom of what's called a meniscus. Now, an important point to remember here is you have to do this at eye level. If you just gauge it from looking out the window in your living room or something, you're not going to get an accurate report. And if you look down at the rain gauge, you're also not going to get an accurate report.
It's like a measuring cup, you know, when you have water in it, you can't just look from here, you got to hold it right up to eye level.
Right on. So do that for the most accurate results. You got to make sure you get right up in there and take a look at the bottom of the meniscus, because that will tell you the most accurate depiction of how much rain fell at your house. And we've had a lot of rain today, and there's more rain to come. That opens up a path for the eventual hurricane to move toward the north long before it comes too close to Florida. Areas that are shaded in dark purple indicate very deep water. Areas that are in red are relatively shallow water. So it's areas here like along the southern end of the Cape Cape Hayes Peninsula, areas on the southern end of Pine Island where the winds are onshore here, where the potential of some coastal flooding is in place. So that we know the best routes to take and how to avoid the crowds, right? But today you have to dodge some raindrops if you're going to a beach or something fun here tonight, as we do have a scattering of some showers and thunderstorms in the area. Right this moment in Lee County, the coverage isn't super wide, but we do have one shower that's popped up in the Bonita Springs area. This one is totally stationary, not moving anywhere at all. So if you're caught in this one here in Bonita Springs along, say, Imperial Parkway or toward Bonita Beach Road, maybe a good while, 25 plus minutes before this one totally rains itself out, considering that it is not moving anywhere. There's also a small shower up the road on US 41 between San Carlos Park and Fort Myers Villas. That one too, not moving anywhere, so just kind of raining itself out before conditions begin to improve there. But worse for the weather, the most active weather is still across western Charlotte County at this moment. You can see how the rain intensity really picks up once you move now to the west and southwest of Deep Creek and really to the west and southwest of Port Charlotte. That's where the heaviest rain picks up near the El Jobin area, and then all over the Cape Hayes Peninsula from Englewood to Rotunda and Placida. There's some pretty heavy rain pushing across the area. In just the past couple of hours, this is showing you the past 6 hours, but really all what's fallen here has happened in the past 3. There's been parts of Rotunda picking up just more than 1.2 inches, but north of the Charlotte County line in areas like Northport, there's indications now of more than 4 inches of rain falling in only a few short hours. That's why that flood advisory continues for Sarasota County. So heads up if you live near the Northport area. Make sure you're using a lot of caution, especially if you drive through areas that are known the flood zones when things happen like this with slow-moving showers and thunderstorms. Everything here really isn't moving very fast, but there is a definite motion toward the south. So if this holds together, this could bring yet another push of rain toward areas of northwest Lee County by the top of the hour, basically in the northern end of Pine Island toward the Bokeelia community, just to the west and northwest of the city of Cape Coral. Now, compared to earlier today, things are a lot quieter in Collier counties. There's only some light leftover rain in the area, and then a few showers and thunderstorms here to the west and southwest of Lake Okeechobee that are trying to push toward the west. So for the rest of this evening, you guessed it, a few additional scattered showers and thunderstorms before the activity begins to wane after the sun goes down later on tonight. Tomorrow's forecast features storms, but arriving earlier in the day than you sometimes anticipate. A lot of people say around here you can set your watch to the storms that start about 3-4 o'clock. That only happens when we have prevailing winds from the east and southeast. Tomorrow, the prevailing winds will be from the west and southwest. And what that does is it pushes the showers and thunderstorms that like to form around the sunrise hour over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico onto shore. So before lunchtime, if you live west of the interstate, you actually have the chance for a shower or thunderstorm during the first half of the day. And then throughout the afternoon and through the evening, though this particular forecast model doesn't show quite as much happening, everyone will still have the opportunity for some scattered storm coverage. So mathematically tomorrow, the chance of rain for just about all of us is up above 60%, even though it's not going to rain, of course, every single minute of the day. Briefly, Tropical Storm Beryl continues to move toward the west and northwest, and now with sustained winds of 65 miles an hour. Absolutely no impact to our local weather here, but it is now moving more and more toward the United States. Could very well impact areas of southern Texas as a Category 1 hurricane next week. As it starts to make that big turn, though, it's going to get caught up in a big trough of low pressure across the eastern half of the United States, and that will keep our community in this onshore wind pattern for a while. So even into Monday and Tuesday, we'll still have the chance of at least an isolated shower or an isolated thunderstorm bubbling up during the first half of the day, as nighttime low temperatures will really only drop off into the upper 70s and lower 80s thanks to the boost in humidity we receive when those winds move toward our area from the Gulf of Mexico. Back to you.